Pastor Pryor's reach and his influence, it stretched far beyond the city of Dallas and far beyond those who were called into the ministry and went out to pastor here from New Birth. Proof of that is the fact that there are pastors from all over the city and pastors who've traveled a great distance to be here just to show their support. And I just want to ask if they would stand just so that we can acknowledge their presence as well. Now, my uncle was very clear. He said, if your name is not on this program, don't add yourself to it. Amen. Well, if you look at the top of the program, my name is there. And I'd like to just share briefly with you the impact that my grandfather had in my life. My grandfather and I, we shared many things in common, starting with his name. If you don't know it, my legal name, my full name is Darrell George Wynn Pryor. It is not the kind of name that I was excited about as a young boy. But as you can imagine, as I grew older and my relationship with my grandfather developed, my pride for my name grew significantly. And it is a pride that is still growing. My grandfather and I, just reflecting and thinking about the things that we shared in common. My grandfather and I, we both acknowledged our call to the preaching ministry at the same age. We attended the same seminary. We both set out to plant churches at the same age. And both of our wives, within the first couple of years of planting the church, gave birth to boys. My grandmother gave birth to my Uncle Michael in those first couple of years, and my wife Sherry gave birth to our son Noah. And while absolutely none of these milestones were planned to unfold or happen in this way, the similarities often provide an encouragement and a confirmation for me as my journey in life and ministry unfolds. Those of you who are members of New Birth, you will recall that I had the unique privilege for 4 beautiful years to sit at my grandfather's feet as one of his aides on staff here at New Birth. I loved every bit of it, and I loved y'all too. And it was a beautiful time. I would tag along everywhere he went. I'd ask him questions 24/7, and he did everything that he could to answer my questions. Many days we'd start at the house. I'd come over early in the morning to find him sitting at the table, eating breakfast, reading the Bible, and listening to the static of AM radio in the background. We'd head to the church from there. And I think about Jackie Standifer, Reverend Williams, you guys would be here. As he'd enter the building singing these random songs. And I swear he was making those songs up along the way. And if you knew my grandfather, you knew that he wouldn't have considered himself much of a singer. But he sung every day as he entered this building simply because he knew it would make the people who were here smile. And so I learned very quickly to sing along with him. He'd take me along when he was visiting church members in the hospital and was teaching me how to care and how to be compassionate for those who were admitted in the hospital. There were times when he'd allow me to sit in on counseling sessions when it was appropriate and when the other person had given their permission. I would shadow him whenever he ministered to a grieving family. And I would take books from his office all the time. Sometimes I thought I was sneaking them, but he always saw me. And he'd give me a day or two, and he'd quiz me on what I had read. There were times that he'd allow me to help him outline his Bible study lessons from time to time. And whenever he made a judgment call or a leadership decision, he would wait until it was just the two of us to explain, to make sure that I understood the spirit that he was making his decisions in, even though he never once owed me an explanation. I would bounce all of my crazy ideas and thoughts and visions off of him, and together we would sit around. Sometimes this was in his office. Many times it was late nights when I sat beside him at the bed and talked to him until he fell asleep, and I said, "Get back up, I'm not done." And we'd keep talking, and we'd brainstorm and dream about the possibilities for God's kingdom and ministry and the church. And it was just such a beautiful time. And my grandfather was very much so a traditionalist. You guys will know he was a fundamentalist. He was conservative and traditional in every way. But he never once tried to conform or water down my contemporary ambitions. And he'd say to me often, "Well, namesake, as long as the message stays the same, I don't see why not. And if anybody can do it, you can." And that would be our joke. I could go on and on and on about the ways my grandfather invited me into his world. During those years, I thought that he was simply training me for ministry and church leadership. But now I know that he was doing something much more significant. He was teaching me his heart. He was giving us yet one more thing to share in common. He was teaching me to value people, because they matter more than your best laid out plans or positions or politics or programs. He was teaching me to learn how to listen. And I'm getting better at it. But he wanted me to learn how to listen because that's the only way to learn how to pray effectively for others. He was teaching me the importance of a disciplined tongue, to choose my words wisely and only speak when necessary, as to avoid hurting people with my words. He was good at a straight face. I just look at you and smile. He was teaching me the ministry of presence, about how important it is to show up for people when they need it most. He was teaching me how to be humble, because that's what it takes to make leadership effective. He was teaching me how to be consistent, understanding that great things are accomplished by a long obedience in the same direction. He was teaching me how to make friends. You guys know that's what that basket of peppermints was for, right? I'd always say, "You need to switch out your candy." He said, "Well, that basket is there to make my friends, and they still like it, so I'm going to leave it like it is." He wanted me to learn how important it was to make friends, because he was showing me that teaching people how to truly follow Jesus is most effective over the context of relationship. He was teaching me the importance of generosity. And this was a big thing for him. Many of you here you were the beneficiaries of his generosity. And this was so important to him that he would challenge me to always keep cash in my wallet. And there would be moments that he'd randomly ask me, "You got some cash on you?" He didn't want me to pay for anything, but he wanted to see if I was getting the lesson. He'd get on me whenever I only had a debit card or a credit card in my pocket. And he would say, "You always keep some cash on you in case you come across somebody who needs help." Right. Because walking around with only a debit or a credit card in your pocket means that in your heart, you're not prepared to be a giver. He'd tell me God blesses those who blesses others. And if you determine in your heart to be a giver, you'll always have something to give. My grandfather was showing me his heart. And I'll never forget the day that he showed his heart to me most clearly. See, I had been talking to him on and off for almost 3 years about how I was sensing that maybe I think God is calling me to plant a new church. And I was praying for clarity. So one afternoon, I visited him at home. It was just the two of us standing around in the kitchen area. He was standing behind the chair that he usually eats at the dining table. And I said to him, "I believe that God has given me clarity, and I think that it's time to step out and plant this church. He looked at me silently for a few seconds, and I swear those seconds felt like hours. And then he took a deep breath and he said, I'd always hoped that God would call my sons and grandsons to pastor one day, but I never really wanted any of my boys to start a church. I asked him why, and he responded with almost a tear, just a glistening of a tear in his eye. And my grandfather was a very strong and reserved man, but his voice cracked just a little bit because it helped me to sense the emotion that he spoke these words in. When I asked him why he never wanted any of his boys to start a church, he said, because I did it. And even though God has blessed me and this church and our family beyond anything that we can imagine, it came with a whole lot of discouragement. He said, and I never wanted any of my boys to have to experience the kind of discouragement that I did in those early years. And I understood where he was coming from, and it was just a moment of silence. But then something almost divine happened. His face slowly lit up with an expression of joy like I have never seen since. It was as if the sun was pouring through the room and was just illuminating his face. And he said, but I learned so much about God in the process. And he said, and starting a church is going to grow your relationship with God like nothing else. And I am so happy for you. And right there, right in that moment, he stopped and he prayed over me and he prayed for the church that I pastor today. And in that moment, everything made sense. It was clear that more than anything that he could have ever given me, what he wanted to give me was his heart for God. He wanted me to know his God as well as he did. And he knew the best way to make that happen was to pass down his heart. So I thank God for how my grandfather intentionally shaped my heart. And your presence here this evening is evidence that in some way he shaped yours too. So as I prepare to take my seat, and so the program can continue as planned, I want to say one thing to my grandfather right now, because I know that he is a part of that great cloud of witnesses that is cheering us on from heaven. One thing I want to say to him right now is, Daddy George, I got it. I got it. I got your heart.